We're here today with Bob Seibel for the talk about the dedication of the football field for his dad, who came in 1954. In his first season was undefeated, unscored upon, and he coached into the late 60s. And we just want to bring up some of the things that Bob remembers about him and I remember about him, and where we used to play and what we have today. So, Bob?
Well, one of my first memories is being a youngster and going to down to the field, which is the Village Park field, and watching practices, watching teams, and then around the supper table, my dad talking about particular players, this, that, and what their strengths and weaknesses were. And a couple of years ago, my sister Nancy got some of our old tapes put on CD, and it shows films of some games down there and some practices and just the whole atmosphere that was created down by the river there, which are some awful fond memories. This particular day stands out because it was a real proud. I remember how proud my mom was on the naming of the field after Dad, and how his mother came from New Jersey to be a part of it. And anybody that follows Somerset football knows that when you come here to play, it's with great pride that our kids step on this field. And I've had the honor of this will be my 33rd fall, thanks to Mr. Rivard coming up and asking me to coach one day in the fall or in the summer of 1983. And it's just a really, really special thing. He talked about some of the things that Robert Seibel did, and one of the things was he used to let the kids in the neighborhood down at the old school, and we'd go in the gym and kids would play, and he would go in his office and work. We might have a scuffle or two. He'd come down, solve it, and then we'd go into the lunchroom and he'd feed the whole neighborhood spaghetti. Gratis of the school district of Somerset. Here's one for you. That would not happen today.
Well, we did, and when I was playing, I saw my first stoplight when we went to the cities to a game at Hamlin to watch his alma mater play. And every year he took a bus load over there, and then we'd go to one of his friends' spaghetti Pizza Hut like deal, and we'd eat all we could. Well, you know how much high school kids could eat, and we ate a lot. And we continued that for many years after, when I was coaching too. We'd take the kids over and watch a game at St. Thomas or Hamlin, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of kids' first experience of going into the cities. Shut it off. Back in the 50s and 60s, we played down in the school grounds behind the elementary building, and that was pretty good. People really liked it because they could watch and walk along the hill and see the game. But they put in an all lime rock infield, and then they put another one on the other side, so we had to move. So about 1977, 78, we came up here. Why don't you shine over to the practice field?
Okay.
At that time, there was nothing here, but just a bare field with a lot of rocks and a big ditch. So before we had let the kids have water at break, they had to bring a helmet full of rocks in. And where the water is, we actually had about 3/4 full by the end of the season. And there was no grass. It was just terrible. They didn't have the money. They had to cut a lot of things out of the high school to get it built. But it got built. And then later on, we played on this field. But when Mr. Nemi came, that's one of his highlights, is having a great field. So he put a lot of time and effort into the field. All right, let's go to the field. I don't know that. Standing on the Seibel Memorial Field now, and you can see where we're standing. The grass is nice and thick. It really is a great job of taking care of this field now. Mr. Nemi started about 1986 getting improvements. Drainage has been really good. Then Mr. Larson came along and he's maintained this, make sure this field is in great shape. Starting in about 2002, we have a tremendous record here. I don't think we can count on, we don't need our all the fingers to count the number of losses. In the conference, it's very few. That's good.
We have one conference loss, I believe, here. We've lost a few playoff games. The good news is that in order to have home playoff games, you have to have a successful season. So although it's bitter to lose that final game, it's tough to beat us here, and we feel real comfortable playing here. It's something that the kids look forward to, and definitely something that we're looking forward to extending the success here on Seibel Field.
Go back to lost in the playoffs. We're thinking Gale Electric.
We lost to Gale Electric and then Baldwin Woodville twice.
And in the conference, Prescott might have beat us.
Prescott beat us in 2011.
Since that time, we've had some really close games. One year we had Bloomer here, and they're going to go for the score. No doubt they're going to win. They got a big line. They got a big back. They're averaging 5 yards carry. We had a couple big plays to be ahead, but we're going to lose. The fat lady wasn't singing, but she was humming. And all of a sudden they ran a sweep. Our linebacker was also fullback, pulled the arms. The ball pops out. Sullivan goes 80 yards for a touchdown. So that's one of the closest games, the closest thing we've ever had. And we play Bloomer, Menominee, St. Croix Central, and Osceola. In our first 4 of our first 5 games are going to be home. So we're looking forward for a great year in 2015. And the kids always show a lot of pride and play hard when they're playing at home in front of their fans. I never even noticed there.
All the updates.
Gilbert, I think it was.
Gilbert or Jesse Bushman from Rochelle.
Rochelle.
She was the anchor.
She was the anchor.
And the
came
400
from
meter
way
champion.
Back.
Yeah.
She come from way back.
It was like,
I can
don't
still
celebrate
remember.
too soon, because that's the fastest girl in the court.
Does red mean on? Yes. Red means
Are
on.
we okay? Is it up?
I can see you.
I see red.
Okay, so
Is it taping low?
I have no idea.
You can't tell. Red is on.
So
I'd say
should I
we're going.
stop?
Works, I think,
Must be
in Clayton.
recording.
He's the manager at the creamery there,
Oh,
and
geez.
he has 4 little ones. They just had a new baby. Well, the light's on again, so maybe that's a good sign.
All right.
Good.
Today we're here with Nancy Seibel Ulrich, Mr. Seibel's oldest child. And we want to just talk about some of the things he accomplished, and we dedicated the field to him back in 1986.
85, I think it was.
1985. So with that, I'll let Nancy do the talking.
Well, my dad, Robert Seibel, was born March 14th, 1929 in a log cabin in Battle Creek Park in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a son of Gladys and Clifford John Seibel. And his father died very young, I think before he was 3. And I think perhaps never having known a father image, it enabled him to become a terrific father. And that's probably a biased opinion, but my siblings agree also. Naturally, we had lots of stories about Battle Creek Park and wooden skis and the olden days. He received his early schooling in St. Paul at Van Buren Elementary and then attended Harding High School. Many of his experiences growing up on the east side of St. Paul during the Depression, I think gave him insight into the later years of dealing with kids who had problems. In fact, he actually quit school at 15 or 16 before graduation, lied about his age and entered the Marine Corps. And later, he got his GED in the Marines and then used the GI Bill to go on to college. So I think he used the Marines as a life influence as far as his disciplinary procedures and his kind of golden rule, so to speak, and it influenced him greatly in dealing with kids and their problems in the years to come. It was hard to pull the wool over his eyes, in other words, because he kind of had already been there. So he served in the Marine Corps from 46 to 48, and he worked on armored tanks. And I think that heavy Marine Corps discipline that he did use as a superintendent down the line also enabled him to gain respect from those of whom he disciplined. Upon leaving the Marines, he used that GI Bill and he entered Hamlin University. In 1950, he married our mother, Joanne Peterson, whom he had met, I believe they met at a gas company late in their high school years. They had both worked for the same gas company. But in 1950, both his studies and his honeymoon were interrupted by the Korean crisis. And he was called to Camp Pendleton, and my mother followed shortly after, and that's where I was born. So just a couple years ago, I got to see Camp Pendleton and the beaches there, and it was quite a thrill. He was discharged from the Marines in 1952 and returned to Hamlin University, where he graduated in 1954 with his bachelor's degree in business education. So it was in the fall of 1954 that he entered Somerset High School system, or Somerset school system, as a teacher instructing business classes. When I think back now, I remember him teaching shorthand, which is a thing of the past, I do believe. He served as a coach for football, basketball, and track teams. And that probably is not so unlike the times now where you're willing to do anything to get your first job. So we lived as a family above the Rendezvous bar. And on weekends, I think it would be Saturday morning, we all climbed into a 1930-something Nash Rambler and spent the weekend at my grandmother's house, my mom's mother, in North St. Paul, where I got to play with cousins, and my dad worked at my grandpa's Skelly filling station over on Arcade, I believe. And then it was during that first year in Somerset that my parents suffered the loss of a second child, Scott. And I remember Dean Tweeton being a very close friend and helping them get through that. In 1956, my mom gave birth to a baby girl, my sister Vicky, and making things quite cozy above the Rendezvous. In September of 1958, Dad became the administrator at Somerset School District, and a third baby girl was born, my sister Joni. By that time, we had moved down to Lottie Ma Bryan's house. We were renting across from the bank, and that house had a great big swing out on the porch, and I think it still does to this very day. At this time, we were a family of 5 with a dachshund pup, and supper was at 6:30, right after football practice, or 6:45, or 7:15, or whenever Dad got home, because he had this habit of talking along the way, and my mother was a very patient person, so that was a good thing. He'd stop and talk to anybody and everybody that he happened to meet along the way. In 1960, His first son, John, was born, and plans were in the making for a new house on Spring Street, just a block away from the school. So that would be even more convenient, less people to talk to on the way home. It was completed in the fall, and our family moved in, and then we soon discovered that a new house, along with a new house comes a new baby, and my brother Bob was born. That was July of 61, and no, actually that was March of 61, and in July of 61, my dad received his master's degree from the University of Minnesota. So you can imagine that was quite an accomplishment, being able to study and hold your job and continue coaching and administrating and contributing to the community and having time for your own family. So when I look back now, I think that was probably amazing. In 1970, our family purchased land in the country and built a country home about 5 miles north of town. It was in the woods, and they had horses, and I had just graduated and actually left for Madison, so during that project. But it was a great way for him to relieve life's pressures by chopping wood and, being master of your own domain. Although his own life was cut short at an early age, his memory lives on by those whom he touched. He was fair and fun-loving and caring, had a genuine love for children, his own children and all children, and for the community. We've had a great emptiness since he's been gone, but his memory and the things that he strived for, I think, have been important in our family and have lived and carried on. Seal Plurd was a good friend, and she painted a verse for him in calligraphy called Once a Child Learns, and gave it to him as a gift. And we feel he patterned his life after that, and as a model for others also. I was going to say, I think I have that somewhere. Thus a Child Lived.
I think so.
I'm going to cut this part out. It goes like this. Thus a child learns. If a child learns to live with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with fear, he learns to be apprehensive. If a child lives with pity, he learns to feel sorry for himself. If a child lives with jealousy, he learns to hate. If a child lives with praise, he learns to be appreciative. If a child lives with acceptance, he learns to love. If a child lives with recognition, he learns to have a goal. If a child lives with honesty, he learns what truth is. If a child lives with friendliness, he learns that the world is a nice place to live in. So that's a pretty special piece of property, and actually I have that on my dresser and look at it every day and appreciate it. Dad's time was often stretched beyond the limits of a normal person, and I think we can all identify because we try to cram 27 hours of things into a 24-hour day. He worked hard for writing grants for Title I programs, and was always willing to fill in wherever there was a hole. Wasn't too proud to drive bus if the bus driver was ill, or help the cooks in the kitchen if they were missing help, help the janitor fix the furnace. So it was just his nature. He stayed after school nights or went back after supper for supervising if kids needed the gym or community members needed to use the office for writing letters or chaperoning for dances, gym decorating, whatever. It was just his nature, and there was no way of changing that, which was a good thing. So it was in 1976 that our nation's bicentennial, and that was the year that we all lost him. He was a champion for all, and I'm proud to say that we still feel that today in our family. My children, in 1975, he had his first grandchild, and he wore a big button that said, "Ask me about my grandson." But 2 months later, we lost Dad to a heart attack, and my kids never really got to know him, or none of the other, 15 grandchildren today, and almost 20 great-grandchildren. But I think because we've kept his memory alive, I named my third son Joshua Robert Bernard, Bernard being my husband's father, who died 4 days before Dad did. Dad asked Steve, "What can I do to help you out?" And Steve said, "Can you sing at my dad's funeral?" And Dad had a lovely voice. He could sing other songs beside Danny Boy, but that was a pretty regular song of his, and he sang for many weddings and funerals. So he sang for my father-in-law's funeral, didn't stay for the luncheon, left to go to a school board convention in Milwaukee, and actually had his heart attack there, and that was the last memory of him. But I named my third son Joshua Robert Bernard, and he just had a little boy, and he named his son Robert Bernard. So I said, his legacy does live on, and I think it lives on that athletic field, which we were so proud to have dedicated to him in 1985. The way Dad lived his life and the goals that he had, being caring and tough and striving for excellence, stay strong today as the teams that come out of Somerset prove, because they're tough and caring and fair and strong, and all of the athletic awards that they have received, I think go hand in hand with that field being the Robert A. Seibel Memorial Athletic Field. And our family is very grateful that the community has chosen to do that. And hopefully this little story will help tell a little bit to future generations on how that field got its name, and a little bit about the person that it was named after. Maybe he should have sold shoes or done something a little less stressful in those later years when that kind of discipline wasn't as acceptable.
Couldn't do it today.
No, for sure. For sure, a lot of things have changed. This is a picture of Dad, and there's a little poem written under it, a little saying, "One stands to open windows and doors that we may see ourselves and beyond. Our eyes focus more clearly. A twig becomes a lesson in infinity. A mind responds. A gentle hammer molds. For the load it will gladly carry. A man steps forth firmly into the light of a new and comfortable freedom."
Okay.
Thank you.
2014 team, the library thought it'd be a good story to do an oral history of Somerset School football. The 2014 team, under the direction of Bruce Larson, ended the season 14-0 and were crowned state champions. Coach Larson early predicted for the season was that they'd be in the top 3 in the conference. After Osceola, they beat Osceola, Johnny Bumphreys predicted to be unbeatable, and it turned out to be true. With 6 trips to the state and 3 state championships, Coach Larson was named the Wisconsin Coach of the Year by the Wisconsin Coaches Association. The Green Bay Packers named him the Wisconsin Coach of the Year. He was not going to fill in the form, but they personally called him and encouraged him, so with his daughter he filled in the form. He won the award from the Packers, and then submitted his name to the National Football League. The NFL awarded him Coach of the Year in the whole USA of America. This is an unbelievable award and has brought great recognition to the teams, coaches, and Somerset schools and the greater Somerset community. Along with Lowell Peterson and Victor Martinson, we've been working on a history of the past players, coaches, facilities, equipment, and the team's successes. With us today, we have our oldest player, Lowell Rivard, who played halfback back in the 1944-45 years. Roger Martell, who played quarterback in 1950 to 53. Bob Maitrejean, who was a halfback and utility man back in 48 to 51. So with that, our task was to find out history, so our Victor knows a little bit about the 30s, so I'll go to Victor.
Well, back talking to one of the old players, Steve Martell, he would tell stories about some of the football games they had back in the 30s, and of course the leather helmets and some of this gear that Lowell has over here. Let's say some of their games were very, very rough, and he says it wasn't uncommon for fist supply. And he mentioned that there were some games they didn't have a full team, and they would play games with 10 men rather than the 11. That's the only stories I have from back that area.
Okay, the oldest member we could find in Somerset was Gerald Blue, and he played back in the late 1930s. He was born in 1921. He attended Somerset schools 1937 to 1940. He played football all 4 years. Some of the teams they played at that time were St. Clair Falls, Grantsburg, Amory, Osceola, and he said they won very few games, although some of the previous teams to him were very good. They practiced below the hill behind the old high school, which is where Village Park is today. The practice area was rough with a lot of rocks and gravel. He stated that they played some games down there, but most of them were held behind St. Anne's. Their equipment for padding was very poor, not a lot of protection, using the old leather helmets with no face protection. He wore the same jersey for 4 years, number 16. Some of his teammates were Lester Martell, Ben Lemire, Harold and Howard Harview, Morris Belargen, Ray Valil, Marvin Shea, and Ray Harview. The next member we have is Lowell Rivard, who played in the 1944-45 season. So Lowell, could you tell us what it was like playing at that time?
Well, it was 11-man football, and we had 14 men on the team. It was a little tough to have a little scrimmage, but we tried. We tried, and we did well. We lost one game by 7-6 that year. That was in 45.
Osceola?
I think it was Osceola, yeah. One game we lost.
What kind of equipment did you have in those days?
Oh, just a leather helmet, and not much for padding either. It was okay. It worked, but a few guys got hurt.
What kind of conditions now? You have to have an ambulance and a first aid person, we should a doctor there. What do they have to help you if you got hurt?
They just drag you out to the side and let you recuperate.
Do you have any questions?
They didn't spend much time on you.
No, where did you play at that time?
We practiced down below the school, and then we played games up there across from the church.
Were the footballs a little bit more round and more like a basketball than now, where they're built to really pass well? Whereas it seems to me, I remember seeing pictures of the footballs were more round, almost like a basketball, harder to pass, weren't they? They were shaped, but they weren't as sleek as they are now, were they?
I don't know. I never
Think they're about the same?
I would think so.
This like the badge you wore?
This year was Warren Martell, one or the other.
Why don't you hold them up? We had a pair of pads that was from the old days here. It didn't provide a lot of protection, and my brother said that some of the pads they always went way above your knee when you ran.
Look at the ribs in there.
Yeah, protect your thighs really good, huh? Oh, they're
Yeah.
hard. Look and feel that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, later on, you had the slide-in thigh pads
Right.
to give you
That's what I was
a
telling
lot more
Paul. That's
protection.
what we had when I was in school.
Yeah.
You had a cuff in the inside of the pants leg, and you put them thigh pads in there.
Just slide them in there.
I think that's what we had too.
And you could never get one that fit, they'd be that much too big.
Well, we were always too small in our era to wear any of this big stuff.
You remember any games that were really tough that you played back in those
The
days?
toughest game I played was against the Somerset twins in Osceola.
Oh, they were good too, weren't they?
They stiff armed me and the blood was flying. Hey, good. Yeah, I got him though, the son of a gun. But he stiff armed me and he got me good.
What was the name of the twins?
Simonstead.
Simonstead.
Dr. Simon said was an Osceola for, he just died there not too many. They were identical twins.
Yeah.
And they said they never knew who had the ball because they both looked exactly alike.
Yeah, they were big guys. They
Yeah, they were
over
big and they
6
were
foot.
good.
And our biggest man was 160 pounds. We had a whole bunch of little guys, like Ray Barrett and Earl Montpettit and High and Earl Rivard, and they're all small people. No, nobody weighed over 160.
You know, you didn't, at that time, you didn't see the size of kids that you see now. Holy bucket.
Now
Huh?
they're really big.
You remember Harold Granger? He
Yeah.
was in my class,
Yeah,
and he was known all over the state, cause he was about 6'4".
Yeah.
Well, holy moly, today he wouldn't be able to hold a candle. I mean, the basketball.
But for his day, he was good because he could do a hook shot with either hand.
He was good because there was no 3-second rule. You could stand right under
Oh,
the
yes.
basket.
Oh,
So
yes.
we'd just lob it in, Harold kick, shoot. It was over. But the way these kids, with the size they got now, it's unbelievable.
Okay, going on, Bob, you're the next in line for years when you played. What was it like back in the time when you played? Where you played up at St. Anne's too all the time?
We started from the high school. We had to run up the hills of the practice field behind the St. Anne's School, and you run back down. Well, that was part of the exercise. But the toughest time I had was we had a coach by the name of Harry Froker,
Yes.
and he wouldn't let up on anybody, whether you were 7 foot tall or 2 foot tall. He out there to play football. So he conditioned us. We were in good condition. But like I said, I weighed 140 pounds, and put the equipment on me with head then. If I could run 100 yards in 20 seconds, I was a speedster. So
Was Mr. Sutton your coach at all? Mr.
Sutton-
Sutton came here for
No,
one game.
that was prior
I
to
think
our
that
he
team.
prior to
coached
you?
basketball, didn't he?
Sutton,
He was there
Yeah,
for
he
1
was-
year.
he was principal, but I don't remember him coaching anything.
I got notes I found, he coached 1 year up
Right.
at St. Anne's, but Father John Rivard was there in his first year at the parish and was so disgusted with the way things were, he became a coach too. That's before your time.
Yeah.
Okay, they didn't win any games, and then after that, Harold Shea convinced Harry Froker to come here. So you had him for 4 years?
Yes.
And Victor, you said he was only here 4 years?
I had him, yeah, he was here for 4 years, I had him for 2.
He left in the middle of my senior year.
That would be about right.
Yeah, he
So
was-
that would have been 1953, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he left the first year, and then Milt Berlin came back.
That's right.
And we always heard how tough he was, and I suppose either he had melted or he was only here for a short time, but we had a lot of fun with him. He wasn't tough at all.
No, Butch was a good coach.
Oh, yeah,
He was a good
Well-
coach.
that was prior to that,
We had him our senior year.
yeah.
We had 4 different coaches from 41 to 45.
Yeah, I suppose.
The service, you know,
Yeah.
like Elmer Parnell went to the service the first year.
Who?
Elmer Parnell,
Elmer?
yeah. He was gone the first year we were in school. And Harry Froker, not Harry Froker, no,
Sorelli?
Sorelli, Frank
Sorelli.
Sorelli. Frank Sorelli was there and he got drafted in the middle of the season. lost him. He was a good coach. Yeah, and then we had Fulkowski. I think that's it, Fulkowski, Elmer, and Sorelli, and then Butch put in different coach every year.
I just go back to my notes here. Coach Sutton was in charge and knew very little about football. The new parish priest watched him so disgusted he volunteered to help. In 1946-47, he coached with Mr. Sutton, Father John Rivard. It is said that Harold Shea helped recruit a player from River Falls, Harry Froker, and he came in as a coach and was a very popular coach. Story goes that he challenged the team to see who the fastest player was and raced them, which at that time they told me it was Lloyd Campo, and he beat him. Then he offered a steel bar to see if anyone could bend it. Nobody could, but he did. And he started with only 13 players to play 8-man football. So what kind of plays did you, Stewart said he had very good plays. That's why they were pretty good for 8-man.
I'll tell you what, the plays weren't as sophisticated then as they are now. The play calling and everything else, I mean, it was pretty plain and simple.
Yeah.
You didn't have a whole book to
We had
learn.
about 3 plays.
Yeah, you're going over tackle, guard, around the end. It was pretty simple.
What's one of the tougher games you remember?
I'll tell you a little story about, and I think if it was Boyceville, but they came up, it was the first year that they had football. And they had a big kid, they called him Rabbit. He had ears about that long. And they came up here like when season first started, this scrimmage, you know, they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And we thought that was a lot of fun. We just run all over them. Well, them kids learned a whole lot about football in the next month and a half, because we played them the last game of the season. 2 of the kids ended up in the hospital. Jim Germain was one. He had his spleen taken out.
Yeah. Boyceville had 2 big kids, and they were up in the area at 300 pounds.
And they beat the heck out of us when they came back. I said they learned a lot about football.
Yeah, they had 2 big boys. I remember that game very clearly. That was bad.
And you talked about Lloyd Campo. He was fast. He's probably one of the fastest kids ever came through that school.
He was fast, but unfortunately, I think he came out of just about every single game with a concussion.
Well, yeah, he didn't weigh over probably 120 pounds, and he run like lightning, and he'd never run around anybody. He'd run right into him.
Yeah.
He'd run right over him. Jeez, he was fast.
Who was that now? Who?
Lloyd Campo?
Lloyd Campo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was fast.
Okay, that takes us to Froker's years. And then we had Buck O'Delts, but he couldn't come. So we don't have anybody from that time period.
From Froker's years?
Yeah.
Well, Froker's years.
Yeah, I had him
I
2
had him
years.
all 4 years.
Yeah.
He was a no-nonsense coach. I'll
Oh,
tell you
yes.
that.
Well, he was an ex-Marine.
Huh?
He was an ex-Marine.
Yeah, he did a lot of things that they couldn't get by with today.
Well, he was an ex-Marine, a lot of discipline. And then Bob Seibel came in.
Yep.
He was an ex-Marine.
Right.
And that could be why 5 guys off of the 54 team ended up in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, them were the days.
It said that when he came, he talked to the guy at Osceola, which you know, who was a football coach in Balsam Lake.
Oh, Balsam Lake, oh, that,
Binkley.
yeah.
Binkley.
Yeah, Binkley, Neil Binkley. Yeah,
Neil Binkley had told Seibel he was really sorry that he came to such a poor place to coach, or Froker, and he couldn't get back to tell the team what they said. The 1950 team with Buck O'Delts, Dennis Birch, Richard Rivard, Bert Rivard, Doug Rivard, in the line, and Norman Dufresne quarterback with Junior Dickoss, who weighed 220 pounds, at halfback, ended the season as 5-1. They beat Balsam Lake first they played. The second time, their biggest lineman had to stay home and work, and they had the 6'5" Shramsky at halfback, and he had a big game running. And Victor, you mentioned something about Shramsky. What kind of guy was he?
well, the Shramsky brothers were my brother's age, my older brother's age, 5 years older. But they were big kids, and as long as I can remember, Balsam Lake always had some big kids. And, you know, with all our little teeny people, you know, but, you know, when our last year, you know, we kicked the daylights out of them. And when Bob Seibel came to the Balsam Lake game, a week or so before, he says, well, you know, he says, when I went to the coaches' meeting, he said, Neil Binkley told me that you inherited the format of the conference. And when Bob told us that, oh boy. And when the game came, we beat them 35-0. And at halftime, Jerry Campo on the sidelines had yelled across the field, "Hey Neil, how do you like the format of the conference now?" And Neil was standing there with his hands in his pockets, and all of a sudden his arms went right straight through. I was watching, and I thought he was going to put them through his pockets. And Bob told us later, he says, "I got really chewed out for telling you that."
We're kind of getting ahead in years here, but going back to Shramsky, I talked to him when he was the AD at Plum City. He's about 6'5", and he said the first game they got beat by Somerset, but the second game they took care of Junior early, and they were known as a very rough punching and kicking team. So they beat Somerset the second time. Harry Folker retired and left Somerset and went on to Park Falls, where he eventually became superintendent. Next coach in line was Jack Record. Does anybody have a recollection?
Oh, Jack Record knew nothing about football.
Nothing about nothing.
My junior year, we had Smiling Jack Record. He knew nothing about football. Hate to say that, but you know, it was.
I think he coached after Harry left, didn't he?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, because I never had him for a coach.
Yeah. No. He knew nothing about football, and taught us nothing really. I think the only game we won that year is we beat Hammond, and I think that was their first year of football.
Jack Record was here only for 1 year. And they did not do very well. He thought the players were too small, too slow, and lacked talent. Pretty hard to win with a team when the coach has that kind of attitude, and they didn't either win. When Mr. Seibel, who was the next time we meet, we'll be talking about, came, he told him that there was only one player. The rest of the people were not very good, and that was Mickey Rubway. And that's where we'll start the next time we meet. Thank you. Any other comments? Let's hope this thing works. I don't know how to shut it off. I could touch it. Can you shut this off? I don't want to touch
Well,
it.
thanks for coming, guys.
You must remember Bootsy Rubway.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
He was just a year ahead of me.
He was shorter than me,
Oh, yeah.
but he could outrun anybody.
He was a tough little bastard.
You're still on camera, Roger.
Go.
I thought you said it was
Well, he boxed Golden Gloves after he got out of school for quite a number of years.
he was a tough kid.
I think they had
Push
high
that
school
button,
block league.
record, and then you hit that.